Hello, I'm Umbrenero and welcome back to Umbrenero's Life. Today's video is doing a 1,000-piece puzzle. So, our final puzzle for 2025 that I am working on is the 1,000-piece puzzle that I found that has like I won't call it a stained glass feeling, but it kind of feels like it. But it has the starters from Generation 1 all the way to Gen 8, I believe. Yes, Gen 8. And I thought this would just be a nice one to wrap up the year and get done. So with this one, the biggest thing I wanted to get done first was the border, because I knew this one was going to be a headache, because a lot of the backgrounds are either green, red, or blue. So I had to get it started one way or another. But while I was getting this all prepared, well, I wouldn't call it prepared, getting it started, I realized very quickly that this puzzle is smaller than the 300 and 500 piece ones that I did. So I was actually able to fit this all mostly on my little background that I use for my bullet journal videos and stuff like that. So it's like, all right, let's do this. Let's make it work. So first thing I started doing was sorting to a degree, because there are a lot of black lines in this puzzle and I needed them to get pulled out so I knew what areas things would go into and so on. What I didn't realize at the time was how many black lines there were throughout this entire puzzle, because in the end this took over 6.5 hours of recorded time to do. There was about 30 minutes that I spent sorting stuff that wasn't recorded, so 7 hours total. Yeah, about 7 hours to do this puzzle, and this is all by myself. I didn't have anyone helping me, and I just wanted to zone out and do a puzzle. So I was starting with all of the black lines, and then I'm like, well, there's a lot of white areas around the center. Well, maybe I could do those first. So I was bouncing between like 5 different things I wanted to do for a good portion of this puzzle. So it just looks like a chaotic mess for quite a while. Like throughout here, I was really just trying to figure out how exactly I wanted to go about this, because then I'm like noticing the lines in between the colors in the center of this puzzle, and I'm like, well, I could do those. I was doing way too many different things at one time, which it does happen, but we eventually did finish this. So I was still kind of going with the thought process of pulling out anything that had the black line And if it happened to have the specific area I was working in, that was even better. So I just kept on a-going. And I found eventually some of the pieces that were going to be more what I thought were centrally located, and then they turned out not to be, and it was the whole thing. But I kept working along this little purple area here and doing the edge of the center, because if I got that figured out, I could start figuring out where a couple pieces were missing from, and it would make things easier. So, like I've been doing, I was bouncing around between a few different areas, just hoping I was getting something productive done. But when I found where the center of this was, that made things so much quicker, I would say, because then I just started looking for pieces that had the background colors that matched the section I was currently working on. So first up, I worked with the pink area, because my thought was like, well, if I can find most of these, I can solidify this piece. It's not going to fall apart as easily. And then it's like, all right, I got a good number here. Let's go to the purple section. And finding where the center piece ended up going was so helpful. But what was even more helpful was once I did eventually figure out where it connected to the border along the top part, which is the left-hand side of the screen, it made it so much nicer, because then I wasn't going, well, is this really where it is? Or is this shifted over a piece or something like that? But I did eventually find that. But I kept going, pulling out pieces that did have all of the black lines and stuff like that to help figure out where the borders of the center were. Like I said, as soon as I found where it connected to the outside, it helped solidify where things were. So there was a lot of sorting going on behind the scenes. Like, it doesn't always seem like a lot is going on in some parts of this, and that's because I was trying to figure out what piece was next and what area it would fit into. So like that lower right hand corner turned into a holding area for a few pieces, and at one point I just got so frustrated I pulled a good number of them away. But here I had figured out a good spot that I had figured out really good spot of where some of these pieces went. So I'm like, all right, let's focus on the left side of the puzzle, get as much done on it as I can. And that's what I started focusing on for quite a while. Because I made the little notice, like I started noticing here that the background pattern is repeated on the other sides. But being able to get a few of these done in a single go would be helpful, because then it is eliminating parts that don't belong to the side of the puzzle. And by doing it at a half at a time, I could see the pieces I had, and I could kind of figure out, all right, are you one of these starters, one of these ones, or one of these ones? And I had a few from each type to work with that I could kind of put them into the rough area of where they would belong. But while doing this, I was still keeping my eye open for the pieces that would end up going around the center area, just to help keep that all aligned. Because I will say, some of those pieces were the harder ones to find, especially when everything was mixed together. But I kept pushing through. And while I was going through, there were some pieces I started noticing that kind of fit in other sections that I wasn't working on. So I was actually tossing them across the puzzle to the rough area they would end up being, which is this side. So as you can see, there's that big pile of pieces that are kind of sorted. And I was like, these are all going to end up around here. So let's start making them fit. Got the next little point done on this center part and kept on a-going. But I knew the rough area where these colors were going to end up because I had the center of this puzzle fully done at this point. So I knew, alright, next to the orange is yellow, then the olive green, then the teal. Knowing that made it so much easier, because as I found one of those colored pieces, I tossed it in the rough area it was going to belong into. And that made things go a little bit easier on the second half of this puzzle. Like I said in the 700 piece puzzle, that there's usually like a third that's really rough and all of that. This one, it was more like there was a good quarter right where it was rough. But once I was past it, things went pretty smoothly. So I was actually missing a couple of the border pieces all the way up to this point. And luckily, I found them while I was working on this half of the puzzle, because I honestly don't know what I would have done if I didn't find them. Because this puzzle was a Christmas present from last year, I believe. And I didn't want to try to figure out how to get a replacement piece or make my own piece. It's like, nope, we will figure out something. But here, we got stuff mostly lined up, right where I knew where the lines were going to be. I just had to get them all to fit together, which showed me exactly how big the one missing piece on the right-hand side was. Because I did question if it was one piece or two pieces. Turns out it was only one piece that was just a weirdly sized piece, which it does happen. But this area started to fly as soon as I really had a lot of these lines done, because I'm not having to look at black and go, all right, is this orange or is this a different color along this piece? I was able to see what the colors on the specific pieces were and actually place them towards where they really belonged. And yes, the right side of this puzzle did take a little bit longer to actually get to, but by this point I had a lot of the kinks that I was dealing with worked out, and I knew what I needed to get done. So in reality, there was a lot less trial and error with this half, because a lot of it was just looking at the color and making sure it was the color that belonged there. For the outer part of the puzzle, the fire type was the hardest ones to fill in, really, because there's just a lot of similar colors there. And just getting them to go into the proper spots was probably the biggest challenge that remained at this point. Well, that and finding all of the pieces for the water types. But at that certain point, you just hit that rhythm where you just keep going and you know you're in that homeward stretch. But one piece at a time, you get closer and closer to finishing your puzzle. And when you think about it, finishing a puzzle is like working on that project you've been working on, or doing those tasks that you have to get done. It's one step at a time, brings you closer to actually getting completed with it. So, you just gotta do what you just gotta do. And I'll say, after the 7-ish hours of working on this puzzle, it ended up looking pretty neat once it was fully done. And I didn't mind doing this one. I'll probably do it again. So, thank you for watching, and until next time, I am Umbrenero. Bye!